Chess friends, hope you are doing well. Today I have a very masterful and cunning chess opening that is played by Torch Chess AI, who is the super aggressive and number 2 chess engine in the world. He initiates the King's Gambit, the most popular opening, against me, and I will share the chess opening tactics and traps. So let's get started without wasting any time. He started the game with e4, and we have e5, and he immediately played f4, the King's Gambit that he has deployed. Here you have d6, knight c6, and knight f6, bishop out to c5 moves, or moves like pawn capturing on f4 or d5 variation, which are all appreciable and logical to consider. I just captured the pawn here, and here white has two cunning little traps that start with bishop c4 and knight to f3. Let me first illustrate the knight f3 variation, where it protects the queen's entry point on the h4 square. Therefore, some of you, Q's Joker, might consider playing g5, a move considered by many absurd and foolish chess players. Then bishop c4 will come, and some may consider playing h6 to build a strong bond of structure, like making an Eiffel Tower on the king side to appreciate the view. But here I can break the Eiffel Tower by doing an archery on the ground side on h4, and here playing f6 is a very bad choice, which some may consider playing. But that is a very foolish move because it provides me an opportunity to go with knight on e5, developing a chess tactic. After you capture, the sweet death kiss will arrive by the queen on h5, Queen Elizabeth will then come on f7, forcing the king to move, and after queen d5, queen takes e5, will lead to a checkmate that will be a very nasty and beautiful checkmate in the opening. So, going back to the position, we discovered that after you capture the pawn, white makes a beautiful trap. Another trap that you can employ is bishop to c4, getting this diagonal. Then the queen will arrive at h4, declaring that your knight is not located on the f3 square, and give you a check. By playing bishop to c5, I will checkmate you on the next move. This is my trap. Then you can slap black's face by playing f4, slapping black with your shoes, which is a very disrespectful thing in public. Then you can bring out your knight on f3, notifying the queen to move back, but the queen says, "Hey, wait, hang on, I will stay here to put pressure on your position." But here, white can actually sacrifice his bishop on the f7 square, like setting a trap, by putting fish food underwater to catch a big fish. That strategy employs by many fishermen, and I, myself as a stockfish man, deploying a masterful strategy. The bishop cannot be captured, as you know, and regardless of the king's move, you can attack the queen by playing h3, and the queen has no retreat squares, like she missed the last train to go home. Then you can set up a trap by playing knight to c3 and knight to e2, which is inevitable but unstoppable, trapping the queen on the next move, and the game will be completely in your favor. Black can't do anything. So these were the chess traps that you can initiate in your King's Gambit. But in our actual game, we have queen to h4 check, then Torch played g3, kicking out my queen, and then his knight comes on c3, capturing the pawn on f3 is not viable. Let me illustrate the variation like an examiner analyzing the test results of students. Believe it or not, what you will get in your exam results depends on who checks your exam papers. So the king's position and file will be opened, where black can harass you by playing d5. Apparently, it looks like knight takes d5 puts some pressure on the queen, but you know what? The queen can come to h4, and as the king moves, bishop g4 comes on the board, and you can see that regardless of your knight's move, the king's position will be very bad because f5 can also come there to invade and attack the e4 pawn, and then your knight, and the game will be completely over for you, like going to the moon with a spaceship but having zero fuel left and no way to return home. You see your home, your country, from the moon, by sitting on the moon, and it is so hilarious. Going back to the position, we notice that you cannot capture the pawn, which is why we play d4 to create a strong center. After capture and recapture, you can see that Torch's king's diagonal gets blocked, which is advantageous for him, and his diagonal gets the open file for the rook. My king and my pieces are just passive, like my king and army going to war, but all of the pieces and my king are just camping and eating bread and milk, with no work, literally no work, except watching reels using Wi-Fi. We have d6, knight to h3 to put my bishop on the g5 square, which is the reason why you cannot play any sideline moves. Black cannot play sideline moves because of bishop g5 and the knight coming to the d5 square, which is why I decided to go with h6 to prevent any sort of bishop or knight entry point on g5. So, we have knight c6 and knight f2 because g5 was coming to invade and attack. Torch just wants to develop his queen and play a long castle. My bishop needs development first. And I am behind in development. I have less development than him, and I have to deal with these center pawns. That is why I decided to go with g5, and he immediately strike me with knight to d5. That is a very cunning move because you cannot just play a simple move like queen to d7. It's like someone throwing ice on you in the winter season, causing you to slip and fall on the streets. So, let me tell you a precious and amazing quote in sudden. Appreciate every little beautiful moment in every day of your life, give it a try and you'll see the world from another perspective. Torch can respond with bishop takes g5 because the pawn is pinned to the rook. Some may consider playing bishop to g7, which looks advantageous, but apparently bishop to h3 will come to attack the queen. This is just wasted for you because after you play f5, the bishop captures, and as the queen moves, knight takes c7 will come. You can see that I sacrificed my knight on the board because my knight is like Bucephalus, the knight of Alexander the Great, who can conquer countries. Then a bishop check will arrive, forcing the king to move, and queen to f3 check will ruin your position. The king has no safe squares to go. Whether you block with the knight or not, I can simply recapture, and your king will be left with no water in his bottle, stranded in the desert. You know that if you don't drink water for 3 days, you will die. That is your body's weakness. So, going back to the position, we saw that any normal move is wasted for you because of bishop h3, also, queen to e6 is not viable because of knight takes c7, which will sever the relationship between your queen and king. The queen moves back to the d8 square to protect the g5 pawn from the bishop's attack. Eventually, Torch played queen to f3 on the board because he knows the circumstances of this position very well. In this position, you can see that all my pieces are just backward and passive. It's like going to the deep Pacific Ocean with my submarine, but all the Navy's armies slip into the chamber, and my king faces attacks from an octopus, a shark, a whale and a sea storm on the f7 square. That is very dangerous. That is why I decided to go with bishop g7 to dominate the center, prompting you to push your pawn to e5, after castling and bishop e6, you can see that Torch's king's position is very secure. I want you to pause the video here and try to figure out the best move played by Torch. Torch is performing very well, his tactics and strategies are masterful. The move is not bishop c4, the best and brilliant move is c4 itself. It does create some weakness for the king, but it also holds a significant advantage. If you capture it, after the recapture, the knight will be under attack and cannot go to certain squares, so it has to move back to e7, then I will consider e5, and after exchanges and bishop e5, it might look like the king is very safe under the submarine, but you know what? An octopus can come into your submarine through the toilet's hole, attacking the bishop. As the bishop moves back, bishop to b5 check will arrive on the board. Playing c6 is not a good move because it will open up Torch's rook file. After the king moves, rook f1 comes on the board to attack the pawn on f7, which cannot be safeguarded by your pieces because they are just lazy like an orangutan. After playing f6, knight to e5 will arrive on the board. You have to play queen to d6, then my knight will arrive at b7, checking the king, and bishop to c5 will come on the board, trapping the black queen. It's like a dragon defeating his enemy and celebrating his victory with fire coming out of his mouth. That is devastating and dangerous. Going back to the position, we discovered that you cannot capture the knight right away because after I capture, your knight will be under attack. My king is also under pressure, which is why as the bishop moves back, Torch played g4 to protect that square. It also prevents the pawn from coming to h5, which is why I played rook to c8. You can see that Torch's center knight is creating much pressure on my center and king side, which is why black cannot develop his pieces right away. It's like an octopus fighting with 8 pieces with his 8 hands. The knight is akin to that, and I am the stop piece, but I cannot die. I have to come back into the game because Torch is just dominating my position with his ugly looking octopus. We have rook b8 and it's not b5 that I want to initiate an attack, because b5 will just win a pawn and it will destroy and stuck your pieces. After bishop e2, Torch's queen goes to the h3 square, and the knight is attacking the knight on d5. The worst case scenario is that if you dare to capture the knight on d5, I will recapture, and as the knight moves back, this will create a 4-square cubic puzzle where I can initiate an attack by capturing the pawn on g5. After you recapture, my queen can capture the rook, and initially, I will win the rook and all the pieces. Your king will have to move up, and I will win the queen. In the end, you can see that I will gain an extra knight, which is just winning for white. That is great and advantageous for Torch. Going back to the position, we discovered that black cannot capture the knight, which is why I decided to go with king f8, as the rook comes on f1, getting this file where bishop takes g5 is no longer available because the knight can easily block it on g8, where the queen could create potential attacks on the rook. We have capture and recapture, and the knight goes back to the e7 square. So far, so good. The knight is trying to protect its territory, just like a bodyguard trying to protect his kingdom's door. Torch's knight goes to the h1 square to go to g3 to create some activity because Torch, a long time ago, played g4 to get access to these squares. As the knight moves here, we have queen f3, and after a couple of moves, Torch successfully played knight to f5, creating some counterplay on these pieces and the structure. You can see that he is threatening to consider bishop d3. e5. Attacking the knight along with this file. After a couple of moves, we have some bishop maneuvers and c5 and e5 on the board. Torch is very determined, like Ronaldo, who just wants to win the football championship no matter what. In this position, capturing the pawn on e5 is not viable because white will get two great pawns, where he can initiate an attack by playing bishop d4, attacking this pawn, and the knight will be under attack by the bishop. The knight can come to h5 to attack the bishop, and the rook along with the queen is creating pressure on the f7 square, which is advantageous for white. Going back to the position, we discovered that the e-pawn cannot be captured, which is why I decided to go with c takes d4, attacking the bishop. As the capture occurred on the e5 square, which is well guarded by the pieces, the knight comes to the h5 square to attack the bishop. The worst case scenario is that the pawn cannot capture the bishop, because it is pinned to the queen. The pawn is a double agent. In this position, some may consider playing rook back to h8, but you know what? This is a very bad move because I can capture your bishop. After that, I can capture the piece on the e5 square, attacking the queen. After the knight is captured, queen f6 check will arrive, forcing the king to move back, and bishop takes e5. You have to sacrifice your queen, there is no other choice, and the checkmate will be unstoppable. The game will be literally over, like you make some statues to stand in the farm to get rid of the crows who disturb you by eating the vegetables and fruits, but the crows leave their poops on your statues, which is hilarious. So going back to the position, the rook cannot move back because of this, and as the bishop moves back to h8, we have a couple of moves. When the knight reaches the g3 square, you can see that Torch's bishop pair is creating significant pressure on my king side, and the knight along with the queen is creating much pressure. My bishop, rook, and knight are just passive. They can't do anything, they have become lazy and a sweet dish for time's grave. We have queen c5 and d6 on the board. When the queen and rook align like this, you cannot capture the pawn on d6 because white can invade and attack by playing rook to d1. Attacking the queen. Also, the f7 pawn will be under threat. The queen can also come to the d5 square, and the knight can come to h5 to create counterplay, which will be dominant for white. So, let me share an inspirational quote with you. Sometimes it takes sadness to know happiness, noise to appreciate silence, and absence to value presence. Going back to the position, I did not capture the pawn. Instead, I played bishop e6 and queen to c4, and he immediately pushed his pawn to d7, which is advantageous for him. Torch captured the knight on g6. If you dare to capture it, then after queen check on f8, it is a very hilarious checkmate. After you check and capture, the pawn will be promoted to a new queen, and black's position is just wasted. The rook check can come, the king is exposed, and the game will be over soon, like finding yourself in a jungle where all your bodyguards leave you behind. Going back to the position, we discovered that I cannot capture the bishop, which is why after queen takes a2 and some checks occurred, queen back to a4 occurred. Still, I cannot capture the piece on g6. Rook takes d6 looks advantageous, but let me examine the variation of what will happen if you dare to capture the pawn on d7 with your rook. Torch's king will go to the e3 square, and the king is just safeguarded in the middle of the board. You can see that your black rook on h7 is under attack, which is why, if you dare to safeguard the rook, which is not possible, another possible move is bishop sliding to g7, then I can exchange the rooks on the board, and you can see that there is queen takes f7. Which will lead to checkmate in just a few moves. Going back, even rook capturing on d1 looks possible, then after the capture, rook to d8 will arrive on the board, and you can see that the game will be over for you, which will be hilarious for white. Even if you dare to protect your structure, I mean position, by playing queen e8, knight f6 check will arrive, and after the exchanges, bishop takes e5 will occur. You can see that your king will be under attack again with the rook attacking on the h7 square. The game will be completely over for you. The rook can also come to d8, which is possible if you want to do that. So, going back to the position, we discovered that rook takes d7 is a very bad choice. It's like a king from the past time traveling to our age and appearing in our society, and everyone thinks he is just a costumed man, a drama artist. The king gets surprised and amazed by seeing cars, mobile phones, and all other electronic stuff. That would be so hilarious. Going back to the position, we have queen takes d7, and after a couple of moves, rook exchanges, and rook d1 and bishop to b4 happen in the game to attack the queen. The queen cannot capture the bishop, because of rook d8 check, and after queen f6, it will be checkmate. So, going back to the position, the bishop cannot be captured, which is why after the queen capture, Torch sacrifices his knight on the g5 square. I mean, in this position, he sacrifices his knight on g7 to attack the rook. After the capture and recapture occurred in the game, we have rook to h1 check. After a couple of moves, Torch is threatening to consider queen to h6 check, which will lead to checkmate. Even bishop to g7 cannot protect it because of queen h7 check, rook to f1 check, and after that, queen to f5 will lead to a checkmate. Going back to the position, bishop to g7 is not possible, which is why after a couple of moves, we have checkmate on the board by capturing the bishop on f5 and queen takes g5, that is checkmate. This was a very beautiful and brilliant game. I hope you enjoyed it very much. If so, then don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye, see you, take care.